Well, good morning, Belong Church. Hey, it is so good to be back with you guys. My name's Kyle, for those of you who don't know me. Most of you, I think, know me by now. I've been there the last couple years to join you guys for your conference. I know some of you guys are shocked right now. Listen, in the last month or 2 months since I saw you guys, I've shaved the gray beard, I've lost 50 pounds, but I assure you, it's still me. But guys, I'm so excited about joining you this morning. I'm excited about the series that you guys have been in with the tables. And I know it's a little weird that I'm shooting this in my office, but you know what? I tried to set it up out in our big auditorium that was empty, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right for this series, tables. Because I'll tell you, right here in my office, I do a lot of counseling. I do youth group, small group stuff, life group here, and we have a table right in the middle of the room. I'll show you a picture of it. And so for me, tables is pretty cool because a lot of life and cool things happen around the table that it's in my office. It's actually one of the most important tables in my life because this is where some of the best things happen and where God does some of His greatest work is right here in this office. So I'm really excited about this, and I'm so thankful that they let me be a part of tables. Today we're talking about trust, a table of trust, and more importantly, we're talking about trusting in God. And this topic, I mean, as a pastor, we find that trust is like one of the most important things you can have, obviously. I mean, the conversations that happen in this room, when I'm doing marriage counseling, a lot of it goes back to trust. When I talk to the kids, you know, you spend years building a relationship with them and building trust. So I understand the importance of this topic. But today we're really focusing on trusting God, not just in the holiday season, but in all seasons. And one of the things that I believe happens with trust is that our growing up and our childhood and the relationships that we have throughout our life actually influence the way that we trust. I mean, obviously, if you've had trust issues in the past with parents or siblings or coworkers or friends or relationships in high school where you had put your heart out there for somebody and they broke your trust or something like that happened. Even when you get married, you have to be able to trust your spouse. And when that trust is broken, it can be a very, very difficult thing to overcome. And so as we head into this season and the holiday season, you know, there's a lot of people that are wrestling with a lot of things. And so it's can I trust God? But it's also, this is a time where a lot of people are celebrating the birth of Christ and family get-togethers and all the people that they love and they trust are coming together and it's a time of just such joy. But here's the other side of that. There's a lot of people that go through the holiday season and this is not the greatest time. This is a very, very difficult time. If the trust between you and someone you love has been broken over the last year, then maybe this isn't a time of joy or a season of joy. Maybe you've lost a loved one or somebody close to you. So this is not a season that you really feel like celebrating. There can be a lot of depression and sadness. And so when you're going through the season and you're feeling empty and you're feeling alone, it can be very, very difficult to have joy, but also to trust God. This might be a season where you're having a hard time with your relationship with God. So we want to talk a little bit about that today. And one of the things that we look back in the Bible and we can see that this relationship and this trust with God, it goes back to the very, very beginning. This isn't something new. Every story that we see growing up in church and every character of the Bible and every person that we meet in the Bible has some kind of relationship, good or bad, with God. And the story after story after story, you can go to the Old Testament and just keep looking. But one of the first stories that we see in the New Testament even is Zachariah and Elizabeth. And maybe you know the story of them, but Zachariah was a priest and he was very old, very, very old. And the thing that Zachariah was known, back then there was kind of labels that you would have. And if you were to describe Zachariah and Elizabeth, the two things that you would say about them was they were very old and they were without child. And one of the things back then, if you were not able to have children, the thought was that God hadn't blessed you. A child was a blessing from God. And so there was the stigma with them that why hasn't God blessed them? I mean, he was a priest. They were great, godly people. And we see at the end of, when they get older, much older, an angel comes to Zechariah and tells him that your wife is pregnant. And it was a crazy story. But the cool thing about that is if you learn about that story, you'll realize that Elizabeth actually, it wasn't just any child that she was pregnant with. She was pregnant with John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was a relative of Jesus, but he was also the one that prepared the way for Jesus. So it was a huge story in the Bible. But you see, they were godly people. They kept their faith in God, and God blessed them. Even though they were old and they thought that those years were long past them, God blessed them with this miracle who ended up changing the world. So here's the question that I'm going to pose to you today. Have you ever asked God this question? God, I have no idea why this is happening to me. But my question is, have you ever followed it up with, but God, I trust you? So that's what we're going to kind of look at today is, God, why is this happening to me, but I trust you? And here's the thing. You guys know I tell lots of stories. And today I'm going to tell lots of stories because when I get around a table and I'm hanging out with the people that I love or even strangers or counseling, it's about stories. I tell stories about the way that God's impacted my life. And I'm very honest with my life. I have a lot of hiccups and hang-ups. I can tell you that. I try my best, but even as a pastor, I struggle with certain things. And one of the things that I'm embarrassed to tell you guys is, but there was a moment that happened to me recently where I didn't trust God. And here's the crazy part. This story happened when I was with you guys out in California back in August. And like I said, I'm embarrassed to tell this story, but I think it's applicable to what we're talking about today. When I was out there, Scott does this thing every single time where I meet with staff or I look at things that you guys do or how you guys do certain things, your approach to different things, and Scott and I talk back and forth about it. And so the Sunday evening after I'd preached, Scott asked if I would be willing to go and look at the healing room and just kind of see how it goes. I'd never been a part of anything like that. Our church obviously believes in the power of prayer and the power of healing, but I had never been through anything like the healing room. And so I told him, I was like, sure, I'll go. I'll just check it out and see kind of what you guys do and how it works and give you guys feedback on what I think. And so I went there just going to be a casual observer. But I thought, you know what, to really experience this, maybe I should go in and do exactly what other people do. And so I went in, I filled out the paperwork and I sat in the lobby. And the thing is, I'm looking at the paperwork and I'm trying to figure out, okay, if I was to really do this, what's something that I could ask for prayer for? It's crazy. Because here's the thing. When I was 23 years old, 21 years ago, I had back surgery. And it was a major, major back surgery. And I have had horrible, horrible back problems for my entire adult life. I've gone through surgeries. I've gone through shots. I've tried every kind of medication. I've done therapy. I've done pain management. I've done everything that you can do. And I'm sure a lot of you have noticed over the last couple of years when I'm there, you can see I'm slouched over, my back's hurting, I kind of shuffle. I look like I'm 112 years old. It's rough. But so I'm sitting there filling out this paperwork and I'm like, well, I guess I could put my back. No brainer. I mean, I'm asking, this is a healing room. What do I need healing for? Well, probably a chronic back issue that I've dealt with every day of my life for the last 21 years. So I put it down, kind of whatever. And I'm looking at the slides on the wall and I'm talking to Kelly's daughter and just kind of observing everything, And so then they call me back to the room and I go back there and I got to tell you guys, I just wanted to kind of check out how it works. But I had zero expectation that anything would actually happen. I'm ashamed to say that in front of you guys. So I get into this room, and to my left is Dave, and in front of me is Tim, and to my right is Frank, and they start to go through what they would do with anybody that goes into the healing room. And I'm kind of taking mental notes. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, okay, they're doing that. Wow, okay, and then it dawns on me. It dawns on me that why don't I actually do this as a person that's asking God to be healed? So in the midst of this, I start going, I need to really take this to heart. Like, what if God could heal me? Like, what if God actually could heal me? I'm a pastor. I'm embarrassed that I'm sharing this. So this starts to go on and they go through all the steps of it and they pray and they do all this amazing stuff for me. And at the end of it, I believe it was Tim, but Tim looked at me and he says, stand up straight. And I stood up straight. Can I tell you guys, since I left California, I have not had one single day of back pain. Not one. It's the first time in 20 or 21 years that I have not dealt with any back pain whatsoever. I walk straight right now. I get up every day. I can jump out of bed, put my shoes on. I have zero pain. God healed me while I was in California. So, yeah. I mean, the question is, God, I need help. And then I trust you. I trust you. Like, I learned something while I was in California about trusting God. And what's awesome is, at the time, Tim looked at me and he said, God's giving me this word for you. And I said, okay. And he said, the word is remember. And I was thinking at the time, I played a lot of sports growing up and I had had several concussions. And so my memory is not great. That's why you guys will notice when I'm there, I practice everybody's names. I practice a lot because I want to remember. And so I looked at Tim and I said, well, maybe God's telling me something about my mental, like I can't remember things. Maybe that's what God's trying to say. I don't really know. I can tell you now without a shadow of a doubt, that's not what God was telling me at all. God was telling me, don't ever forget who healed you. You went to doctors, you've done medication, you've done therapy, you've done surgeries. Don't ever, ever forget. Remember this day, I'm the one that healed you. Whew. Guys, I can't tell you, like that trip to California, it wasn't just about me attending like your conference. It was about God healing me. So that's one story. So remember God, trust God. Like in all situations, when we're lost, when we're confused, when we're hurt, like we should trust God. But sometimes it's even on a bigger scale than that. Like sometimes it's us, right? It's us personally. We're going through something and we need to remember that God has our back and that we need to trust Him. But there's times in our life when literally our world is crumbling around us. Like things are just happening that we can't explain. The magnitude of it is so big that in the moment you almost forget like God's presence or His existence or that He's even there with us. I want to give you an example of that. On May 22nd, 2011, it was a day that will impact me and my family forever. Maybe some of you guys will remember this event, but I've talked about it, I think, before. But that was the day that an F5 tornado ripped through Joplin, Missouri. And Joplin basically is right across the line here. That's where we eat, we shop, we work, we do everything in Joplin. So Joplin is considered home to us. That day was a day that for 38 minutes, an F5 tornado went right through the heart of Joplin. And I had friends and family that were impacted by that, greatly impacted. We lost people that we knew in that tornado. As a matter of fact, 166 people died in that tornado. And I believe there was something like 1,150 people that were injured in that moment. And you guys know, the ones that know me, like I'm a storm chaser. If I would have been in Joplin at that time, I would have been right in the middle of that tornado. But I lived in Tampa at the time. And it broke my heart. I remember turning on the television that day and I had told my family back here, hey, there's a chance of some pretty bad weather, guys. You guys need to kind of pay attention. And I remember watching the Weather Channel. Mike Bettis is one of my favorites. He chases tornadoes, and they pulled up a shot, and they were at my little bitty hometown right by Joplin. And I remember seeing them going around this roundabout, and I thought, oh my God, like the Weather Channel is in my little bitty hometown. And then a few minutes later, they did a live shot, and it was from the hospital, right in front of the hospital where my kids were born. And you could see in the hospital, the hospital behind Mike as he was doing his live shot, and it was completely destroyed. And I'm talking like rubble. And as they panned the camera across, as far as you could see, there was nothing. Joplin was gone. The heart of Joplin was gone. And you have to understand, during the day, there's hundreds of thousands of people that are in Joplin. It's not a little bitty city. It's pretty big for around here. And I remember knowing the magnitude of it because Mike Bettis, who is a professional who's seen all these storms and all these horrible things, I remember he actually broke down on air and started crying because he saw things around him that you just can't comprehend. It broke my heart. And in that moment, I was like, God, they need you more than ever. Like, we all need you. Like, this place is broken. And some of my friends, my best friends, were in the middle of that. One of my best friends is a captain at the fire department over there. They have tons of different stations, but he was in one of the stations He took a direct hit. The fire station actually crumbled and fell on top of all of the firefighters. All their equipment, their fire trucks were under rubble. And my best friend, or one of my best friends, actually had to dig himself out of the bricks so that they could go out and start helping people. You can't imagine this event. A months later, I flew home for a wedding. And I remember as we were coming down the interstate, Range Line Road is one of the main roads that you go into in Joplin. And I was driving down that road, and I came to a place on 20th Street, and we took a left, and we drove a couple blocks, and my mom asked me, she said, "Do you know where you're at right now?" And I looked around and I said, "I have no idea where I'm at. Everything is gone. There's no markers, there's no symbols, there's no houses or banks or restaurants. It's gone. You literally don't know where you're at." And my mom said, "Well, you lived right there. I used to live in an apartment right there at 20th in Connecticut, and it was gone. I had no idea where I was at." But here's what's crazy, is as you looked off in the distance, there was one single thing that you could see. There was a giant cross, and it's probably 30 feet tall, and it was still standing. And what's crazy about that cross is that you could not see anything. You could not find any landmarks. You could not know possibly where you were at in Joplin. But if you could find the cross, you knew exactly where you were at. You knew what direction you were facing. You knew what way to head. Everything around you made sense. You knew exactly where you were at if you could just find the cross. It's so powerful. So powerful. And the crazy thing is, when people started traveling from all over the country to come to Joplin to volunteer and to assist, they actually, one of the first stops they would go to is that cross. And they would gather around that cross and they would pray. And they would get their hearts prepared for what they were getting ready to go into and the way that they were getting ready to serve the community. That cross to this day has become a symbol. It's a monument, and it still stands there. And as Joplin has continued to rebuild and there's all these new houses and new restaurants and things, that cross stands right in the middle of it. And it will be a reminder forever that God was absolutely there in the midst of what seemed like a tragedy that we had never seen before. But God's presence was there. So, I want to jump into, obviously, Scripture at this point. I've told a couple of stories about the power that God's had and the symbols and things that I know that I need to focus on. The cross is always what I need to focus on in the moment of trouble or pain or heartache in my life. But I want to go into the Bible, and I want to touch on something just for a second. This blows me away. Our pastor a couple of weeks ago was talking about this, and it seems like it would be one of the most verses that would just not fit with what we're talking about today. But I think if you hear me out, this is going to be pretty powerful for you as well. The Lord saw, we're talking Genesis, this is the very beginning. Here's the verse. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. I don't know if I've never paid attention to that verse before, but when I heard it a couple weeks ago, it just was a gut punch. Did you hear that? The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth. I wrestle with the fact of I didn't even know that the Lord could regret something like that. Because does that mean that God made a mistake? Can God make a mistake? Is he sitting there in that moment thinking, I made a mistake? God's perfect, right? How does that happen? But if you look at other translations of this, it says God's heart was greatly, deeply troubled. Deeply troubled. So it depends on the translation. But here's the crazy thing, and this is another thing that our pastor had pointed out. So many times in the Old Testament, you see the wrath of God. You see the anger of God. But in this moment, you don't see God's anger. You see God's sadness. That his heart was in despair because what he had created had become so wicked. Here's the other thing that's crazy about this. There is 1,189 chapters in the Bible. This is chapter 6. By chapter 6, the world had already gone south. Mankind had already gone south. Right after this, you see Cain and Abel, and you see murder has already been introduced into the world. Chapter 6, we've already blown it. But the coolest thing about this, for me, after reading that and thinking about it, is this. God could have stopped. God could have wiped us out and given up. God had a hurt. God had a regret. God had a sorrow for what we had done to him. And his response was to love us. As badly as mankind had hurt him, instead of wiping us out, which he had every right to do, his response was to save us, to pursue us, to go after us. That's a God that I can trust. And it doesn't just stop there, because as we see a little bit later, and I want to start to transition this into Jesus, because that's what God used to pursue us forever, to show us how much he loved us, was he sent his son. And one of the coolest things is the moment that we see at the Last Supper, because as we talk about tables, Jesus is sitting around a table, right? And he's sitting around with his closest friends. And one of the most impactful things we see about Jesus' ministry and as he's headed to the cross is the Last Supper. And don't forget, Jesus has just gotten hurt at the Last Supper because he is betrayed by one of his closest friends. All right, so this isn't just a moment where we see like this amazing thing of this breaking the bread with the disciples. He got hurt. Judas just hurt him. He betrayed him. He sold him out, one of his closest friends. But Jesus' response, this is so awesome, and this is such a lesson for us about how to trust God. In Matthew 26, verse 26, it talks about this. Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after breaking it, he broke it, he gave it to his disciples, and he said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink of it, all of you. Yeah, but this is a moment where you're like, yeah, you keep telling me trust God, but maybe you don't understand, Kyle. Maybe you don't understand the pain that I've gone throughout my life. And that's fair. I don't understand everybody's pain. But just look at this for a second, okay? Because in this moment, Jesus, and sometimes we just glare past this part, it says, he gave thanks. How in the world can Jesus give thanks in that moment? One of his best friends has just betrayed him. And not only that, he knows exactly what's getting ready to happen. Jesus is getting ready to take on the weight of the world, the sin of the world, the most pain that mankind has ever experienced. That is going to be on his shoulders. Jesus knows what's getting ready to happen. And he gave thanks. God, I don't understand the situation that I'm in, but I trust you. And we see Jesus do this right after this as he goes to the garden. We'll pick up the next verse of 42. He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, but may your will be done." Did you hear what Jesus was basically saying there? I mean, I don't understand, but I trust you. He asked a question to God, and he knew God's reply was going to be, you have to die to save them, to save you. Do you trust him? Maybe it's time that we rethink the way that we pray, the way that we ask. Maybe it's time to say, "Dear Heavenly Father, I don't understand this situation, but I trust you." Have you ever prayed like that? I have, especially in the last couple of years. There's been so many times in my life that I didn't understand. The fact that God called me back to my home church. Most people don't go from big church in Florida back to a fast-growing church in Joplin and then back to my home church. That's not usually the way that it works out. And when I told my family, hey, we're coming back to this small church, and the preaching wasn't great at the time and the worship was, and I told my family, I said, I feel like God's calling. And my family said, we trust you. They weren't really saying they trusted me. They were saying, we trust God. I mean, I will tell you, at that moment, my prayer was, God, I don't understand what you're doing, but I trust you. Because I'll tell you, before the last couple of years, I was guilty of one of those people that I felt like God was a genie in a bottle. Like that I just asked for these wishes. And God, I hope that you will grant this wish that I have. It wasn't always, God, whatever the outcome, I trust you. I mean, it's funny because a lot of times we're like, well, we're disappointed. We ask for something from God. We pray, God, this is what we need, and we're disappointed. But the truth is, God already knows. He knows the answer before you even ask. And it's not just that God isn't giving you what you're asking for. It's that God understands everything. He sees the big picture. He knows what's best. And so there's times that God knows that we're going to be disappointed. But if we just look a year or 2 or 5 or 10 downstream, we can look back and go, man, God knew what he was doing. God's always known what he's doing. And the Bible tells us that he loves us and that he will do what's best for us according to his plan and his purpose. But that's hard for us because that means in every season and every holiday, depression and sadness and divorce and affairs and every season that we have to say, God, I am broken and I am hurt and I am standing in this rubble. But I trust you. That's one of the most difficult things you can do. I just want to end like this. I want to kind of circle back to Genesis 6. And here's the one thing that I kind of want to just bring this home with is, in that moment when it talks about God having a regret, and like I said, some of the translations talk about even a deep sorrow. You have to understand that in that moment, God was also in a relationship, obviously, with us. Not just the people there, but mankind as a whole. And here's the choice that we have. In any relationship, you have a choice. You can either walk away from it when it gets hard, or you can pursue it. You can walk away from it when you don't understand why somebody would hurt you, or you can forgive them and you can try to build that trust back and to love them again. And I would just tell you the example that God set for us there. There's no question. You shouldn't question how God feels about you, because in that moment, he chose to pursue you and to pursue me for eternity. That's love. As bad as he was hurt and for the sin, he wanted to just create us, to love us. He gave us, created the world. He gave us animals. He gave us the ocean. He gave us all these beautiful, wonderful things. And we didn't appreciate it. And instead of turning his back on us, he chose to love us. And so there's 2 things I want you to think about going forward over this season. Number 1, he gave us the cross. That was the gift that he gave us. And what he was telling us with the cross is, I love you now. I love you forever. And everyone from this moment forward, I love. There's nothing I can do to prove my love more than giving you my son. And so it kind of sounds mean, but literally God owes us nothing. Like God gave us everything. And I don't know how you can't trust a God who gave his son for you and me personally. The other thing that I would tell you is change the way you pray. No matter what this season looks like, no matter how depressed or hard it could be, or even the joy, no matter what's happening in this season, just do this. God, the season that I'm in, I'm okay with. God, I might not understand what's happening right now. God, I really want this. I don't understand why this isn't happening, but I trust you. Because let me tell you, if there's one thing that I learned to my last trip out to California, it was that very thing. I mean, when I went to the healing room, I didn't understand what was going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen. And quite frankly, I didn't believe that it was actually for me. I mean, I was excited to learn about the other people that were taking advantage of the healing room. But I walked away from there a believer, like a believer. I walked away from there with my faith completely changed on the way that I feel about the power of prayer and the way that God can heal people, anyone, including me. I was embarrassed to tell you guys that story, but man, I am so thankful that I took advantage of that, because I can tell you, I trust God more now than ever. And that's crazy to say as a pastor, but you can too. Trust me, you can trust him. Guys, I love you guys so much. I miss you. I can't wait to see you guys again. And hey, let's continue to worship.